Alright, boys and girls and kids of all ages, fishermen, fisherwomen, doesn't matter. Isaac Imfinger here. We are going to talk about the infamous senko, stick bait, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't really matter. They flat out catch fish. Now, we're not necessarily going to talk about colors, though I possibly might touch on some of my favorites. We are going to talk about rigging them. Texas weightless, drop shot. However you like to rig them, we're going to talk about it. If I leave something out, or if I just don't touch on it at all, hit me up in the comments. I'll make another video, or I'll explain why I didn't say anything about it. First off, we are going to talk about the Texas rig. I'm going to use a white senko. That way, hopefully, you guys can see it a little better. I have here, it is an extra wide gap bent shank. And what I do is, you can see that flat bend right there. I like to feed my worm on right there, all the way up to that flat bend. Then I bring it out. Not much hooked on there. See that? Then you feed it all the way up and turn it all the way around, and you see how it's covering the complete eye of the hook. Very, very key. I've found that if you cover the eye of the hook, if you're doing it weightless, if you're doing it Texas weighted style, doesn't matter. I prefer to cover the eye of the hook. That way you have that little area of the hook coming out right there. Helps it stay on the hook better whenever you get those hook sets. He's not going to wiggle down, bunch up, cause you grief. So, whenever you got it like that, what are you going to do? Well, you just let it hang naturally, straight. Pinch it, and that'll tell you exactly where you need to penetrate the senko. You go in to the senko and all the way out the other side, and then it'll be flat. See that? Just like that. Beautiful. Then, what I like to do, not everybody does it, and it's not necessary all of the time, but I haven't found that it'll mess you up on hook sets or anything. You want to squeegee it a little bit, just like that, and then barely catch the tip of that hook, and that'll help you be weedless, so you can throw in that dense heavy cover, not get worried about hanging up as much. The only difference in a weighted and a non-weighted, you guessed it, the weight. What I like to do is I'll take, depending on the density of the cover that I'm fishing, makes it heavier, lighter weight, but I never do a weight. I always do a bullet weight, and I never do one that is smaller than the end of my senko where the eye of the hook is. And all you're going to do is, before you tie your hook onto your line and then rig it up Texas like this, you take that bullet weight and slide it on the line, and you want to peg it. Take a toothpick, that's old school, take a bobber stopper, whatever you need to do to keep that bullet weight down onto the senko, just like that. That's what you want. You don't want it flopping around all the time, because that's going to cause you to hang up in that brush. Now, if you're fishing water that doesn't have a lot of brush, doesn't have a lot of grass, things like that, then you can leave it, and sometimes you can put a bead on top of that eye of the hook, and whenever you're fishing it, whenever you're popping it through the water, whatever you're doing, it's going to go tink, 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 make a little bit of clack. That might help you catch some fish. So, that is the Texas, both weighted and weightless. Now we're going to talk about drop shot. Drop shotting, there's lots of videos on it, but I like to use a hook similar to this. I'll show you guys that so you get an idea of what you're looking for. And what you do is, you're going to have your line come down into the eye of the hook. It's tied on, and then leave your tag in. Run it back through so that your hook will stand straight up in the water column like that. And then you have your tag end is going to run down, and what I like to use is just one of these kind of a ball style weights like this. And the reason I like to use that is because if you get hung up in rocks, if you get hung up in weeds on that weight, most of the time you're not going to get hung up on your hook or your Senko or anything like that. But your weight may get hung up. So what I like to do is I'll tie a very little overhand knot, just one single one, at the end of my tag line, and then I'll put whatever size weight I need on top of that knot at the end of my tag line. And what that's going to do is you don't want to fish this on a slack line, you want a fairly tight line. That way your hook will stay up and your weight's going to touch the bottom. So if you're fishing sandy, if you're fishing muddy bottom, whatever, things like that, not necessarily rocky bottom, but you can. Whatever the fish want, that's what you need to be throwing. So what that's going to do is your weight is going to drop to the bottom. You got that tight line, so your hook is going to stay up here like this. Weight's down here, hook's up here. Beautiful setup. Works for finesse worms, works for Senkos, works for a lot of different baits. Use your imagination, figure out what the fish want, and then throw it. A lot of people like to take a hook like this, and they'll go in, and that'll be that. That's all they do, right there. I don't like that. The reason I don't like that is because, A, if there is weeds or anything, boom, you're hooked. B, that fish has to engulf that whole worm before he possibly gets hooked. So what I tend to do with my drop shots, if I'm not going to rig it up traditional style like that, I'll go back to my Texas extra wide gap hook and I will rig it up Texas, and the only difference is I leave the tag in whenever I tie the hook on, drop that tag in through the eye of the hook, put my weight on, and wham, there you are, sinking up here, weight's down here, and you got a lot of action. Any little bit of current, it's gonna wiggle and you're gonna be great. Now there are other options to your arsenal of Senko setups. One of them is a nail weight. I'm fairly new to the nail weight situation, but they're alright. I've had some success with them and I do like them. And they're exactly like what you would expect. They're shaped like a nail. These are VMCs. You can get them in different weights, you can get different brands, whatever. But what I tend to do, and the only time I use a nail weight thus far, is whenever I wacky rig, and I will talk about wacky rigging in a second. What you want to do is take that nail weight, you got the head of your worm and the tail of your worm. Typically, on almost all Senkos, one is going to be thicker than the other to a point. So what you do is you take that nail weight, push it down into the tip of that worm, just like that. And what that's going to do is it's going to off balance it. This side is going to be heavier now. And so if you got it Texas rigged, you could Texas rig it through the other end, and that's going to make that bottom hit the rock, hit whatever. Like I said, use your imagination. Whatever works, works. Whatever the fish want, that's what you need to be throwing. If you don't have confidence in it, odds are you're not going to catch a fish on it. That's the way life works. So, confidence, imagination, two key factors. But, like I said, wacky rigging. Super, super simple. Like everybody says, KISS. Keep it stupid simple. Take your worm, hook it through the middle. Voila, you're wacky rigged. See that? Woo! So the way I like to do it is, if I'm going to use a nail weight, you got your nail weight in there, just like that. This side is going to hit the bottom, and this side is typically going to stay up and float more. So you could keep it on a fairly tight line, let that hit the bottom. This is going to float up like this. But whenever you're going through the water column, you're going to have that jellyfish-like motion on this worm. It's going to flop just like this through that water column. Bass love it. They will go nuts. So that's one way to rig it. There's also, if you want to go this route, I just started doing it. Not sure if it's helpful, not sure if it hurts, one way or the other, but you can get O-rings, slide your O-ring on to wherever you would normally put your hook on your wacky rig, and then instead of going through the worm, go through that O-ring. And what that's going to do is it's going to prolong the life of the worm. Your worm isn't going to tear where the hook is. It's going to tear up. All soft plastics tear up. It happens. But it's not going to tear up as fast because it's hooked in that O-ring and it's not hooked through the rubber, so the rubber is more stable. So, colors. This white one, I don't throw them very often. I really like them because you can dip them, you can change the color of them, you can do whatever you need to do to make that fish bite. You can take Sharpie, color on it. Whatever you need to do. If they're hitting white shad, if they're hitting white anything, there you go. Dark, really muddy water. I like to throw the white. Some people don't. I do. But my favorite all-time color of Senko is this maroon with a black back. I absolutely slay bass on this worm. I throw it Texas, mostly Texas weightless, and I throw it in deep heavy cover. I throw it in no cover, and the fish absolutely love it. Another one that I have really good results with, and you're all gonna say it, so here it is. Green pumpkin works great. Watermelon also works great. So there's that. One that I've just started using and I've had really good work with, and it's the last color I'm going to talk about. I'm trying to make this video somewhat short. Is kind of a green pumpkin with a wider kind of a pearl belly, and it works really well whenever the water is a little bit darker, not real clear, no great clarity, where you want something that's a little bit brighter, but you don't want something that's super crazy looking, like a bright yellow or a bright pink or something like that. So those are my colors. Those are the ways I typically rig them. I know there's other ways to rig them, but I normally don't use them, so I'm not going to talk about them. If you guys would like to comment, see more videos on rigging, I'm going to do one shortly about swim baits, probably. Possibly frogs. We'll talk about it, and we'll see what happens. But thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Isaac M. Finger. Thank you very much. Have a good one.